The KKK were a group of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that were active in America throughout the 1920s and beyond. They made efforts to be prejudiced and discriminatory against ethnic minority groups, specifically African Americans living within America at the time of the 1920s and onwards. The KKK are commonly recognised by their distinctive white hoods and white robes that they often wore at Klan meetings and when engaging in acts of racism and discrimination towards African Americans. Now, the KKK were very powerful in the 1920s, and they developed power throughout, and then towards the end started to lose popularity. We are going to start with how they first gained popularity in the 1920s. The KKK first started in the 1860s and often used acts of terrorism and brutal violence in their persecution of African Americans. This often included a process called lynching, which included forcibly hanging an African American, usually from a tree in a local village or town. The police often did not get involved with these acts, as many of the police were members of the KKK themselves. This only lasted for approximately 15 years until the government put a stop to it. However, in the 1920s, a man called William Simmons started a new version of the KKK, which was inspired by a film called The Birth of a Nation by someone called D.W. Griffiths. Now, this film was very popular in the 1920s, and the plotline of the film basically shows a white family being attacked by African American thugs and almost monsters, the way that they're shown in the film, until they are scared away by a group of KKK Klansmen riding in on white horses to save the day. This very much showed the KKK as the heroes and the African Americans as the villains. And after this, the KKK started to become a bit more of a popular idea again and started to gain more popularity through the 1920s. The KKK often engaged in huge parades and cross burnings in order to intimidate African Americans as best they could. They were often unchallenged by the police, as they had been in the 1800s. And there were even instances of the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, in World War I, showing the film Birth of a Nation in the White House and actually commenting how accurate its portrayal of African Americans was, which basically showed that at the time America was a very racist country, and the KKK actually had a lot of support from people in power, which is a very dangerous thing. At the height of their power in the 1920s, the KKK claimed to have between 4 and 5 million members. However, by 1930, this had dropped to around 30,000. This was a result of the criminal activities of some of the KKK leaders, including a man called D.C. Stevenson, who in 1925 attacked and murdered a young American woman on a train. He was then arrested, and in an attempt to try and reduce his prison sentence, tried to rat out other members of the KKK in an attempt to let himself off the hook. This didn't work. He still did prison time, but as a result, a lot of people kind of found out a lot of gruesome secrets about the KKK, and as a result went off them massively. Now, the KKK did lose a lot of popularity in this time, and over time people weren't as bothered by them, but they did come back in different groups, and the racism that they represented in America was still there after the KKK had disappeared, which eventually led on to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. But the KKK did represent a really horrible racist idea within America that in some ways is still around today, but it's a good way of kind of examining the attitudes within America at the time.